Will you promise that no settlement money will be given to any J6er who assaulted a police officer?
No, I won't promise that.
Because it's
How
DC,
so?
because all the jurors are gay, all the judges are Democrats, and all their daughters are progressive donors.
I don't think that, no.
Steven,
I don't
do you
think
think
that's
the
what Mike
Supreme
is
Court's
saying.
That's your best example for how anything has ever been run like this before.
I'll answer the same question again for like the fourth time here. I must be doing a good job because you guys keep asking the same questions again and again.
Biden didn't abolish ICE either. I don't even know where this comes from. Like, just none of these statements are even remotely true. They're all kind of goofy and unserious.
Partisan political employees handing out billions of taxpayer dollars to their political opponents' perceived victims. What could possibly go wrong? That's what I was left wondering after the Trump administration recently announced the creation of a $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund from the federal government, which will issue apologies and payments to people who are approved who feel that they were victims of government weaponization, primarily during the Biden administration. This fund will be administered by 5 people, each appointed by the Attorney General and subject to removal at the president's discretion. No judge will have to sign off on these settlements and payments, and the people in charge of this fund will seemingly have the ability to just issue out apologies and payments to whatever victims they see fit. That's a recipe for partisan payoffs and corruption, if there ever was one. This all stems from a lawsuit President Trump filed against the Internal Revenue Service after a contractor illegally leaked his tax returns in 2019. A textbook example of weaponization of the government, which, to be clear, is a very real issue and concern. But the weaponization fund is an inherently corrupt and flawed way to try to rectify this issue, and the Trump administration, has a huge hypocrisy problem to boot. This White House has itself repeatedly weaponized the federal government against the president's political opponees, whether it's their attempt to criminally prosecute former FBI Director James Comey for a social media post that, whatever you think of it, is First Amendment protected free speech, or it's their attempt to retaliate and punish the Associated Press because they wouldn't use their preferred word choice for the Gulf of America or Mexico. Yes, that happened. Yet something tells me that these victims of government weaponization aren't going to be receiving any apologies or compensation from the new fund, especially because it is incredibly conveniently designated to expire on December 1st, 2028, which is right before a new president, which will most likely be a Democrat, would take over. That's not sketchy at all. This terrible idea makes a mockery out of President Trump's famous promise to drain the swamp, and it really optically couldn't come at a worse time. This administration is going to dole out billions of taxpayer dollars to its political allies while the American people are struggling to afford groceries and gas. Yikes. But that's just my take, and the debate is only just beginning. Joining me now to debate it all, we've got the liberal streamer Steven Bonnell, aka Destiny, and Mike Howell, a Heritage Foundation fellow and president of the Oversight Project, a conservative-leaning watchdog group conveniently concerned about waste, fraud, and corruption. And Mike himself hopes to be appointed to President Trump's new fund. So let's get into it. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, Mike, I'll start with you and get your kind of big picture thoughts here on why this is important and necessary for President Trump to be doing.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think a lot of terrible things happened, particularly during the Biden years, in which the whole of government and even institutions outside government went beyond the bounds of any legal or proper restraints, all in a mission to destroy their political opponents. And it's not just President Trump, who, of course, has, had attempts on his life, and, people tried to put him in jail through loony theories time and time again. But it's a lot of people who, just by, either being his supporter or ideologically aligned, like, victims of FACE Act prosecutions, or, Catholics that were really targeted by the FBI, or even the victims of weaponized immigration policy, people who've lost loved ones to, illegal aliens that were shipped into the United States. And so for those reasons, I think compensation is needed. When the government hurts people, we should make them whole. This never should happen again, and I don't think it's happening now. I disagree with your assessment that the Trump administration is by any means weaponized, and it's time to take care of these folks. And the point I'll end with that is lost is, these allegations of corruption, which I think are far-fetched. President Trump was wronged deeply by the IRS. I mean, they allowed his tax returns not to be
I would agree
protected
with that,
and
by the
leaked
way.
out. And right. And so, like, we're forgetting the selfless act here that President Trump legally, and you could have political questions about it, sure, but he could have taken this money and put it in his pocket. And instead, he's giving it to a fund to serve a charitable and well-deserved purpose. And something I've been calling for a long time. And I think it saves the taxpayers a lot of money, actually,
Okay. Well,
because it centralizes and caps it.
what I meant to say that I agreed with was that the IRS did wrong President Trump when the contractor illegally leaked his tax returns. I imagine we all agree on that. Like, obviously, that's not supposed to happen, and that guy was criminally prosecuted, and rightfully so. I don't necessarily agree that it is selfless, because he is both the plaintiff and the defendant in the lawsuit, in that his own Justice Department. I mean, that's not really a functioning litigation system there, where you are suing and then also in charge of the settlement with yourself. And that's what prompted this all. We will get into that more, though. I want to bring in Steven here. Give us your reaction to what you just heard.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how deep we want to go, or into the civics lessons of how unbelievable this is on so many different fronts. I mean, like you said, the idea that Trump has been abusing this position as being both the president. So in a lot of cases, he is engaged in litigation as a plaintiff, and then in other instances, or in the same litigation, he's the defendant. So he gets to tell his DOJ, because we know that he gives them direct orders, to settle with himself. And then in this particular case, he is creating what is essentially a slush fund. And the creation of that slush fund is going to be headed by, where are our checks and balances? By members of Congress? No. By members of the judiciary somehow? No. By 5 people that the White House themselves can pick? Nah, it's too much of Trump trying to govern literally directly from the White House, either because he doesn't know how government works, so he doesn't care to operate within the ordinary bounds of the government. And we've already seen in the past, like when they talk about people who are victims of the government, they're talking about like Ashley Babbitt's family. The types of money that they're paying out here is just unbelievable. If you really think that you've been wronged by the government in some way and you want to sue the government for it, that option is still fully, completely available to you. I don't know why we would have to create a special fund for people in a way that is historically unprecedented. And I don't know why we would sunset that fund on December 1st of 2028. That doesn't make sense either, especially given that the origination of this entire case was Trump having his tax returns leaked by his own IRS. Like, none of this really makes sense from a civics perspective. My question would be, if you wanted to create a corrupt slush fund to award money to your political allies, what would you do differently
Mike.
than what Trump is doing here?
Well, there's a lot to bounce off. Let's try to recall everything in order here. But like, I find it funny that all of a sudden, everyone thinks that Trump, as this unitary executive on steroids, actual power and authority over every aspect and function of the government. It's the left wing position constantly that no, he does not, and there should be separations. And so, when President Trump is, as an independent individual American, wronged, he still has the rights to sue the government, and it was the DOJ who settled it. And Todd Blanche, who bravely
You don't see
did
any
that,
problem with
spoke to
that?
why he chose to. Do I see any problem with President? No, I think the fund is terrific. I think it's a
No,
noble and
not with the
selfless
fund.
act. I think it's
With
gonna.
the general principle
Mhm.
of the president both being the plaintiff in a lawsuit against the administration and then his own appointees overseeing settling with that. That's not an adversarial process, right? They can just give yourself whatever deal you want. They literally work for you and can be fired by you, and they're in charge of deciding what settlement they give you. You don't see a problem with that?
No, if I saw a problem with it, I wouldn't be putting my name out there to help lead it and be selected to lead it. I think it's a terrific way to spend this money. And I think the freak out is not based off the form of, or the construct or the process even. It's that a lot of people on the left wanted these people to be destroyed, these victims' lives ruined. That was a whole purpose of this. And so I think it's less about the form of it, and it's the function of dealing with the rampant wrongdoing that happened. And it's also the scale argument is completely blown out of context. The Biden administration spent billions of dollars on left-wing nonprofits just for the sole purpose of opening the border and rushing these people around, American communities while shutting down ICE. And so the President Biden outsourced his immigration policy before. That was done an adversarial process. And it's just, selective opposition here, because we're getting at a central claim and thesis of what the left, with all of its cheerleaders out there, did so fundamentally wrong. And they don't want those stories told. And I'm going to tell them.
Well, let's talk about some of the victims here, or perceived victims, because I personally think that you and the Trump administration and others have identified some actual victims and then others not so much. Mike, I'll ask.
Well, can I ask
Yes,
a quick question
please.
real quick on that? Just to be clear, if a future president, as a private citizen, 5 days before taking office, decides to sue the government, and then once he's in office, the DOJ decides, oh wow, well, we're going to give you a settlement of $1 trillion, and the guy suing the government because he felt like before the government was just mean to him, somebody in the IRS office is something mean. Would you support the president being able to do that?
Will anyone actually get a payout from Trump's weaponization fund this year? Well, according to our channel partners at Kalshi, people think there's a 30% chance that at least somebody will receive a payout this year. And then specific people who people believe may be paid out include Enrique Tarrio, Hunter Biden. Apparently there's a 10% chance of that, according to some folks on the prediction market, Kash Patel, Michael Caputo, and Mike Lindell. If you ask me, I don't think anybody's going to get a payout this year because I think this thing is going to be challenged and tied up in court for a long time. So, and possibly not even ever go into effect. So, I'll probably be opening up my Kalshi app on the iPhone. It's really easy. You just download the app, and then I love checking the markets, getting to live updates, and probably putting some money on these payouts not happening. But that's just me. If you want to get involved, you can use promo code BREADP to get $20 free when you trade $20 today. Now back to the show.
No, I wouldn't, because it's not actual harm to say something mean. I don't support that whatsoever. Here, President Trump has a valid claim, but you would disagree with that because you were cheerleading people trying to assassinate President Trump prior. So we're not going to find common ground on that. That's okay.
Gotcha. What is Mike's legal background? Is it anything or?
It's tremendous. It's about 15 years of sustained oversight advocacy and anti-corruption work, intense litigation in the civil space, and it's advocating for this very concept for 5 years.
Okay, so you think that having the plaintiff in a case and the defense in a case being representing essentially the same party and creating settlements with itself, how is that a healthy adversarial process that's delivering us like good rulings, like good and just rulings?
You guys want me to answer this question a third way? I can try to, but I don't think you're understanding the way I've already answered it. It's that it was settled by the Department of Justice and Todd Blanche, the Department of Justice. It wasn't President Trump himself in that
But
settlement
they work
agreement.
for
He
him,
was the plaintiff here. And yes,
effectively.
absolutely. I understand that. And now the left wants to use this argument of unitary executive control that exists only when it serves them to make that point. And I think that's bogus. I think, again, arguing over the form
Was
is
it not?
ignoring the function here. And if we're going to ask questions, I want to know, Steven, do you support or think that President Trump deserved to get shot at?
No, I don't think anybody in the United States deserves to get shot out. I wish President Trump would say the same. But my question is
Okay, I'm glad
how
we
is it
cleared that up.
okay it was always clear. There's no question about this. I go out and I do public events. I don't like it when people are out there trying to kill each other for political opinions. I just wish the president would have that opinion, and I wish people like you were brave enough to ask him to put that opinion out there.
Well, hang on, Mike.
When it comes to
I'm
both
sorry.
sides being,
Destiny, I'm gonna.
Oh no, wait, real quick. Just on the
Then
Todd
I'm
Blanche
gonna
thing. Okay, so
reclaim.
it's not. This isn't even a confirmed attorney general. This is an acting AG.
He's auditioning
right? Not
at
even
the
with Senate
moment,
confirmation. Yeah, you have Trump has given orders to the DOJ in a way that we have never seen, my understanding, at least in my lifetime, if not in all of U.S. history. Like, what is the equivalent action of any prior president, Republican or Democrat, putting on social media, I want you to choose this prosecutor, Lindsey Halligan. I want you to go after these 3 people. And then they start filing bogus indictments, stuff. Sometimes it doesn't come back from the grand jury, valid. Lindsey Halligan is still the appointed prosecutor, even though she's not supposed to be legally, and they keep trying to kick her off, and then the DOJ keeps putting her back on. Like, how are we going to say that Todd Blanche is not taking orders from Trump when he's ordering the IRS to give a ton of money, or the federal government to give a ton of money to Trump, essentially as a slush fund to settle his own lawsuit? Like, in any other world, you would be screaming about corruption here.
Okay. Couple things there. Todd Blanche works for President Trump. Everyone in the executive branch, at the end of the day, works for the president. In particular, this case, though, the record's out there that the Department of Justice settled it on their own. Okay. And so we're talking about, did President Trump walk in and go to the settlement table and say, exactly, you want to do this or you were fired? You're arguing things that aren't in evidence. And as it relates to who he gets to pick, that's a prosecutor, of course he does. And if you want a comparison, since these are really compound questions you're asking me, look at the President Biden's administration, how Lisa Monaco and Merrick Garland were coordinating with the White House and state prosecutors that went after Trump's allies, and the whole web of weaponization, the very thing that right now we're trying to solve for the innocent people that were harmed by the whole of government weaponization under Joe Biden. Now we're talking about whether the right form of fixing it is appropriate, because nobody wants to deal with the fact that these people were harmed in a bad way.
Well, let's talk about that.
Whole. There's victims out there.
Mike, sorry, Steven. We have a lot to get through. And so one final question on kind of the structure and form here, and then we will get into the specifics of the potential beneficiaries of this and some of who should this help and how it's set up. Is there, under this model, where you can sue as a private citizen and then your own Department of Justice that you're overseeing then negotiates a settlement that then creates a fund that then you are allowed to decide how it is dispersed? Mike, is there anything stopping, say, like, I know this is probably your worst nightmare, but a President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if she were to run in 2028, if she were to sign on as part of an environmental lawsuit against the United States federal government for failing to act on climate change, right? Could she then, after taking office, negotiate a settlement, her own Department of Justice, to create a $100 billion Green New Deal fund that then she could appoint 5 people, just one with the consultation of Congress, but 5 political appointees to then dole it out? What would the issue be with that?
Yeah, like USAID or something to that effect of, taxpayer dollars going out the door through a run roughshod administrative state.
Well, that's congressionally authorized, isn't
across
it?
the globe at
USAID?
scale. Yeah, sure it is. It's the same. So is the money here, by the way. It's like
Not
maybe
for this purpose.
basically the entirety of
No,
the
it's
federal government, which is basically a make-work job for Democrats, 90% voting bloc. The examples are profound, but the problem for you guys is they're all on the side of the Democrats. That's how the federal government has operated in shipping money out over decades at this point. Americans are coming to realize it. And now that money can actually be spent to help people, the liberals who don't like it because they wanted to put these people in jail, they wanted them destroyed. And so to your hypothetical, I'm sure the Democrats will try any which way to fund things that they want to do, because they always do that. But now the different things is I'm going to rely on you guys to all oppose it as vociferously as you oppose this.
Well, I will gladly. But let's talk about then the victims, and let's move along here. So already we have
just for the record, these are not real legal. This is like the craziest take on anything related to.
Well, we don't need
how
to
our
get
legal system
into
works
the
at all,
the legality of it all. I think we should focus on the merits
Sure,
and
we don't have a
morality
legal
of
argument.
it. No, I actually don't want to do that.
I would love to have a 1-hour
what were
legal
the
argument
legal
on this.
arguments
You guys
that-
can,
that you
guys,
raised?
nope. I'm going to keep the floor here, and you guys can set up law debate time later if you want. But I want to talk about the people. So
Would love to.
we've already got hundreds of January 6th defendants lining up to apply for this weaponization fund, which again, the payments are not going to be overseen by a judge. They don't even necessarily have to have a legitimate legal case. There will be some where they'll be past the statute of limitations for the actual alleged rights violation, but this again is not going to be a court process. It's going to be an extrajudicial process. So I'm wondering, Mike, if you were appointed, because it does say in the DOJ document announcing this that they will consider the morality of individuals who apply, will you promise that no settlement money will be given to any J6er who assaulted a police officer?
No, I won't promise that, because right now those terms are being decided by the Attorney General. I mean, that is subject to national debate. It's not up to me to determine the outward bounds of those things. It is to work
But if
within
you were put on
framework
the
that is
board,
established
would
by.
you support money going
but I'll tell you.
to somebody who assaulted a police officer, or no?
Well, I would, what the Attorney General has said is we would review the totality of the circumstances, which I would do. And I'll tell you what I'm doing so I can be prepared to do that. I'm reviewing the settlement agreement for George Floyd, who, obviously resisted arrest and got $27 million. The settlement agreements for Black Lives Matter rioters that settled with police and obviously resisted arrest. And so I want to see in the historical records of similar settlement agreements how resisting arrest or other kind of activity, which is a matter of degrees, played out on that scale. And so those are all things I'll study.
Wait, just to be clear, the resulting settlements that result from the adversarial process of two different parties fighting on both sides with an impartial and a mutually adversarial judge in the middle, whatever results from those processes, you can't simply look at dollar amounts and compare them to this, which is like a mediation/arbitration fund with absolutely zero legal oversight, with absolutely zero engagement from our judiciary, with little to no oversight even from Congress. These are not even remotely the same thing.
So, Mike, I just want to get clarity. Get clarity. So, you would potentially be okay with money from the weaponization fund going to even violent January 6 offenders who may have assaulted police or were convicted or pled guilty to assaulting police officers. You won't rule that out.
Yeah, I'll answer the question again. That is the subject to the debate right now. The Attorney General went before Congress and they're arguing about that very point. And so I will work within the bounds that are set up for the commission. And then in doing so, in part, the standard of reviewing the totality of the circumstances in line with what the Attorney General said. You would look at the whole context surrounding any individual instance and what those bright line delineations are. Like, we will study to see how previous similar settlement agreements had worked and taken those things into account and make the best judgment of using the best, use of funds to go to victims who most deserve it. And so you can take from that what you would like. But all this to say is when I am on the commission, if I'm lucky enough to be selected, I do not want to prejudge all these specific cases and draw the lines here with you
But
gentlemen.
it's just
No
the
offense.
reason I ask is because the Department of Justice documents announcing this say very clearly the morality and character of these people will be considered. And
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'm just kind of astonished to hear you say this because my whole life I've heard conservatives as the party of back the blue, and now I'm hearing you would potentially be open to giving anti-weaponization payouts to January 6ers who assaulted police officers, who dozens of whom were viciously attacked and assaulted on January 6th.
Well, you can hear what you would like, but I would prefer you to listen to what I say. And I did not say what you just said. I said the decision for the line drawing is being made right now, and I will work within those frameworks that are established. And I told you I am in the process of studying the George Floyd settlements and other settlements with people who got into it with cops, and there are degrees of that, right? There's a difference between being on a barricade or something and not obeying an order and beating the crap out of a cop. Obviously, those things, with my background, you can expect what kind of judgments I will make, but I'm not going to prejudge specific context based off, the phraseology that you wish to use here.
It's not phraseology. I mean, dozens of people pled guilty to and were convicted of violent offenses, but that's fine. You answer the
Sure.
question. You can answer it however.
Sure. We'll take another run at it. Do you think there's a difference between
Go for
punching
it.
a cop in the nose or disobeying an order?
Of
Both could
course,
be
yeah. I'm talking
deemed
about the
assault.
violence. I'm
Okay.
talking about
Then
violent
how do you draw the
assault.
line?
Yeah,
Right. You're asking me to draw a very
charges that are
particular
violent
legal
that they
line.
were found guilty of.
Okay, well, then you're drawing another line, and then you're taking into account a none, to use Stephen's, previous argument, an adversarial process with an adversarial judge, because they did not have that in Washington, D.C., in these kangaroo courts. And so there's going to be independent fact
Sorry, what do you
finding that
mean?
occurs.
Weren't
They
they?
don't
They
believe
were
in.
found.
They don't believe in courts. So what do you mean? What does he mean? They don't believe in
January
the judicial
6ers
system.
were
It doesn't-
they
it
were
doesn't-
they were processed.
Their rights
I'm-
were run roughshod in the D.C. courts. I think that is
Yeah,
something that I've
How
been saying
so?
for a very long time.
because it's
How
DC.
so?
Because all the jurors are gay, all the judges are Democrats, and all their daughters are progressive
I
donors.
don't think
who
that.
are
No,
all-
Stephen,
I
do
don't
you
think
think
that's
the
what Mike
Supreme
is
Court's
saying.
That's
legitimate?
exactly what he's
Hold on,
saying.
no. Trying to put words. Let me ask you a question, Stephen. You've asked me a time. Is the Supreme Court legitimate, and do you respect their decision in the Voting Rights Act case?
When you say respect, do you mean like, do I acknowledge them as law? Yes, of course.
Do you think they're corrupt? Okay. You don't think it was like corruptly illegitimate or anything like that?
I think there are huge questions around Alito and Thomas and the perceptions of corruption based on the massive amounts of money that they are taking in.
What's
and
the connection to the January 6th? Because I don't want to derail into Supreme Court ethics
Because
debate.
Stephen said did something about the courts. I won't put words in his mouth. He just
Do you
said
think
them.
the verdicts that were issued in the DC courts were correct for the Jan 6 people?
No, absolutely not.
You don't think they were legitimate?
I think the Supreme Court agreed with me. The 1512 charges were thrown out, guys. Are you missing that whole point? It was a bogus charge hanged over these guys' head, and they were run roughshod through a very intense process, which was out of proportion with anything afforded to anyone in any similar situation, to include the Black Lives Matter rioters, which actually weren't similar because they were way worse. They burned down a lot of this country and actually engaged in
Well, they were quite
serious
different.
sustained behavior. Yeah, the BLM were worse, they didn't get charged.
It depends what metric you're looking at, obviously. It's worse in the sense that
burning
more
down the
people
country?
died, absolutely. Yeah, but it wasn't, a targeted attempt to overthrow an election result and an attack on democracy. It was
Oh,
hooligans
okay.
and protesters, and I think they were despicable, to be clear, and I
Of
wanted them
which there were like
prosecuted harshly.
15,000 arrests also, by the way. This idea that we didn't
But a
prosecute
lot of
black
those
lives
charges
and
were
guess who
dropped,
settled with them?
unfortunately, Stephen.
The city settled with them, and I'm studying those settlement agreements to apply for the commission.
But the thing is, Mike, though, in that case, the settlement was reached by adversarial parties, not by political appointees.
Was it? Because I saw Jacob.
Who are...
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm getting.
Oh, no,
getting
go
hot
ahead.
here. I was going to say, was it
Oh, no.
adversarial in Minneapolis or Minnesota? You had Jacob Frey supplicating himself on the grave of George Floyd and then giving out $27 million to the family. That
They might be sympathetic parties, but they're not literally the same thing, right? As opposed to Trump versus Trump. But we discussed that. I guess when we talk about the purpose of this money, why wasn't this? If you want us to believe, Mike, that this is not a partisan thing, and the Trump administration did say in the documents Democrats can apply, but then why on earth is this not a bipartisan panel? Right? Why are these people not picked from both parties to hear these claims? Why is it expiring right before the Democrats would take charge? Do you have a reason other than it being partisan that could be the case, Mike?
So I guess I can answer like what I would do if I was in the situation. But of course, the answers to those questions, just like why those specific language was put in, was not made by me. I'm applying to be on the commission. I didn't set up the commission. I don't think the attorney general has precluded, participation on the commission seats of any political party. I don't think he said that. If he has, I missed it. And so I don't know how to respond to that. As towards the expiration,
why sunset it at 2028?
Yeah, why sunset it in 2028? Also, I don't think he's going to pick any Democrats, or maybe one token, but regardless, sure, I get your point. He hasn't said so yet.
Yeah, I don't. Why do you sunset it? I think it's a logical date. It's the end of the administration. That's when you want the funds. I'll tell you this. So if I'm commissioner,
And that's convenient.
I won't need till 2028.
You don't want payouts in the next administration to people that were had the government weaponized against them, right?
As I said earlier, those people will get paid out. The entire Democratic Party and the federal, government has existed for decades to do just that, and they do that at scale. That's what USAID was. That's what everything else was. I have no doubts Democrats will use government to drive money to whoever the hell they want, because that's what they always do.
But specifically, if this is a good and important program that is necessary, why does the need for it go away in 2028, right before the Democrats take power? You understand why that appears deeply cynical, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's not a need for a 1.776 billion fund in that next administration, because there aren't those remaining victims. We'll take care of all of them way before the expiration.
There'll be new victims.
Oh, really?
From the Trump administration.
No, Trump
James
would never
Comey?
weaponize government.
James Comey is a great example, actually. So,
Okay.
for example, he posted constitutionally... Let me explain, and then I'll give you a chance to respond. James Comey, whatever you think of him, and I'm not a James Comey fan, to be clear, not a James Comey supporter, but he posted seashells, spelling out 8647, which, if you look in the dictionary, has meanings that include to remove or get rid of. It's constitutionally protected free speech, and they tried to criminally prosecute him for it. So, Mike, when that prosecution is inevitably thrown out because it is unconstitutional, it has been condemned by basically every free speech organization in America, he will then be a victim of government weaponization against political enemies. He is Trump's political enemy, and so he would be the perfect candidate for this fund in the next administration. No? Why not?
No, and I run a free speech organization, and I don't condemn it. I think the FBI director knew exactly what he was doing in an environment where people were taking shots, and still are, at the president of the United States, an environment in which they killed Charlie Kirk, in an environment in which people are getting swatted all the time. And so, and you don't know what else is in that case and what they found, and I'm not here to prejudge it.
We know everything that was in the public indictment.
Yeah. If your example is James Comey versus hundreds and thousands of victims, actual victims,
it's just one example.
You can ride that horse. No one's going to buy it, but go for it. I mean, Trump is not waging, war via his FBI on his enemies at all. I think at least getting a lot of heat
mostly
for it.
Through his DOJ.
Whose homes are getting raided at the scale that you saw in the Biden administration? We're talking about thousands of people.
He's literally
We're talking
publicly
about
posting messages to his attorney general on who to go prosecute, and it's all his political enemies.
Yeah, there's a big difference between
Steven, I want to bring you in here. I want to give you a chance to respond to some of this.
When you're a grandma.
I think that's horrible. But you can't. I don't believe that Trump is not weaponizing the government actively when he literally had his White House retaliate against the Associated Press because they won't use his preferred pronouns for the Gulf of
Okay.
America. It's textbook government retaliation against media outlets he doesn't like. You can go down the list. He's trying to get people fired. He's prosecuting. He's sending out lists of Democrats he wants prosecuted for all these sorts of things. I'm against the weaponization of government, but I don't know how you can look at the Trump administration and be like, no, they're not doing that at all. It's just
Yeah,
the Democrats, just Joe
call me
Biden.
when the AP is, getting their doors kicked in and like pre-dawn raids with CNN on the front lawn, and there's grandmas getting, put in handcuffs. This is just apples and oranges stuff.
I mean, James Comey literally had his home raided over constitutionally protected free speech, or he was arrested at least. I don't remember all the details.
Agree to disagree.
All right, Steven, bring you in here.
I don't even know what I mean, like, again, it depends on how much like basic civics you want to go over. Like USAID was a congressionally authorized, I guess, like subdepartment or whatever of the State Department. So to compare any money going through USAID to a special slush fund with no congressional oversight that is created literally by Trump himself and then appointed by people that are all Trump fans that are all then dismissed at 2028 so that nobody it's just like, it's obvious this is super goofy and very unserious. Yeah, I also think it's very funny that like we couldn't prejudge any of the cases related to the J6ers, that it wouldn't be fair to prejudge any of those, but we absolutely know where we would stand if Comey were to try to apply for any money here, despite having no information about what the FBI is running on for his indictment. But I mean, it's all to be expected.
Again, I didn't say that. First, on the civics lesson, as I'm sure you know, the Judgment Fund is funded by, guess who? Congress. That is the first branch of government. The money's already there. And so it went through the process and is drawing from that fund. And so I don't see the civics distinction or understand this lesson you're trying to teach me. And second, I welcome James Comey to apply to the fund if I'm on it.
The fund what was Congress allocating that money for?
The Judgment Fund, to settle judgments and claims against the government. That's what the Judgment Fund is. It's what Obama used for, his settlements. It's been used before, and it's capping it and centralizing it in one purpose here, as opposed to all the individual claims that could be brought, is an effective use of government money.
So claims against the government probably mean when I hear claim or complaint, I'm thinking like civil lawsuit that's filed and then eventually won through the court process. That's generally how that works, right? It's a lot different than saying, here's a claims fund and I'm just going to give it to all my friends. No?
Well, no, so basically, and I'm trying to keep this, on the up and up here, but the way it works, and we wrote a lengthy, if you go to itsyourgov.com, .org, I'm sorry, we wrote out a legal justification about this whole process many months ago because we've been advocating for this concept. And so individuals with claims against the government can bring those separately, like, it can be consolidated in some ways. And then there's certain things the government can do to make it easier or harder for people to bring those claims. And so the rationale and like the efficiency of spending here would be to have one bucket that is capped as opposed to, thousands of potential actions making, independent ways through the system. And the difference also is you don't want a situation where like you have class actions and the government's paying millions, like hundreds of millions, and kind of like litigating these things for decades. And so there's an argument for efficiency in this process. That's why Congress set up the Judgment Fund. Sure, like I'm not blind. I know there's a lot of congressmen who don't like what the purpose that it's being used for a settlement here, but the civics lesson of it is Congress already gave the money to this is.
But you acknowledge the Judgment Fund is
also, hold on.
meaningfully
Just real
different
quick.
from the anti-weaponization fund.
If you want to have a ton of people that want to, like you said it yourself, you can certify as a class, you can bring a class action, you can do litigation. If you want to talk about inefficiencies, I mean, like we can't pick and choose. Like the legal system only works assuming it's available more or less equally to everybody. Not that there are huge shortcuts for special groups of people. If the government feels like they can't handle the caseload for something they're opening themselves up to, which by the way has been the case over the plethora of habeas claims that have been brought across so many different states, and we've seen prosecutors and judges complain about this across the country because they didn't increase any of their staffing because you go figure, nobody wants to work for the federal government right now in the prosecutor's offices because they're jokes and they have zero integrity in how they're conducting their work, but that's up to the government to staff. You can't say that, well, it would be inefficient, therefore we're just going to open this fund up to whoever our friends are and we're going to bypass the entire process by which this fund was originally marked for. I mean, the easy question would be, what is the singular best example that you can think of that is the equivalent to what Trump wants to do with this slush fund that's ever been done in all of, I guess, like U.S. history? What's your best example for how anything has ever been run like this before?
I'll answer the same question again for like the fourth time here. In my litany of examples, that's how the Democrats have run the federal government for a long time. So Obama had his huge settlement with the Native Americans, but did also go through a much lengthier, inexpensive process where
Settlement
the money
that was
didn't
a
go to
case
the
they
victims.
fought. That was at the end of a whole process. They won that case, and then that was the settlement that they
Right.
decided on. But the federal government fought that case.
All right,
That
but
wasn't a settlement
let
created by.
Mike respond and flesh out that comparison to
Well,
the
that's the
Obama
worst
case.
comparison, though. But I'm saying that's
okay,
the best.
I'll
That was the
give
one
you
that was
a
listed
chance
on the
to
DOJ's
respond.
website. It's
I'll
not a
give
good.
you a chance to respond. But Mike, first, you continue. Please explain the Native
Yeah.
American example from the Obama administration,
So
how
the
it's a
Keeples
parallel.
Gate, or that case is obviously being touted as DOJ as a precedent for this. But my point's more broad than it. It's like, yes, the settlement fund. This is a new or a major use. It's historic, right? Like there's no dodging that fact. And it's because there was historic amounts of misconduct and people harmed by it that the federal government needs to deal with and compensate them for the harms they did to it. And so there's not an apples to apples on the fund being used for some of the thing because the federal government hasn't done anything this bad in recent memory where you needed to do something like that. And so my example to how Democrats drive money, again, $4 billion plus to open borders, nonprofits out of DHS. And you can argue like, yeah, no, we live from CR to CR. There's no like civics ferry overseeing all this stuff. It was the Biden administration paying people to invade the border and ship them around town to
Oh
hurt
my
people. And those
God.
are the people I will make whole if I'm on the commission. I'm
Well, Mike,
solving for the harm.
let me ask you about that
Uh-huh.
because you mentioned that, and that's actually
Like how Abbott and Paxton have shipped over 120,000
Stephen,
illegals to other
hang
states
on.
as well. But okay.
So let me ask you about that because I'll just say that the Obama case involving the Native American settlement, I mean, that was a class action lawsuit that was settled where there were
Uh-huh.
then parameters you had to meet and people had to have legal claims. The problem with this fund is that even you don't actually have to have a lawsuit or a legal claim. It is not a judicial process. There's no judge overseeing any of it. It is just you apply for it, but it's not a lawsuit. Your claim can be past the statute of limitations. There's not any sort of certification about these payments from a judge. It is meaningfully different, though I take your point.
Uh-huh.
Conservatives were very upset about the Obama thing at the time, and I probably agree with a lot of those criticisms. You mentioned immigration there, though. Are you suggesting that I feel horrible, to be clear, for families of crimes of illegal immigrants. I think it's terrible. Obviously, I agree there were massive problems with the border crisis under President Biden. But are you suggesting that if somebody whose family member was killed by an illegal immigrant in America, that then they're entitled to potential compensation from an anti-weaponization fund? How is the government directly weaponized against them?
Uh-huh.
Illegal immigrants may have gotten worse at points under Biden, but illegal immigrants come and go into our country for decades.
Yeah, that never like we saw during the Biden administration. So, like, as part of my pitch, and I'll be rolling out more on this, and I've posted this as one of my ideas, and I would be one of five. And so I wouldn't control the whole thing. I'd have to operate, of course, by the bounds set for me. But one of the ideas that I would advocate for, if it is allowable within the construct, so a lot of caveats there, but I'm for it. That's why I'm saying it. Is that, understanding that the Biden administration, Mayorkas, for which he was impeached, weaponized immigration laws for partisan and political ends. And what they did was awful. They ignored the law. They invited people over and they used improperly government money to pay nonprofits to help them do that. And it resulted in some people, yes, unfortunately, dying and losing family members and being harmed. And so I think that if we have a $1.776 billion fund, I will consider, claims to people like Lake and Riley's family. And yes, I do think they deserve to be compensated for the harm inflicted on them by the Biden administration.
So what's the distinction there between somebody whose family member was killed by an illegal immigrant who entered the country in 2018? They don't get any compensation from the fund under your thinking here. But somebody who was killed by an illegal immigrant in 2021, they're going to get compensated.
Intent.
What's the distinction?
Intent.
Intent?
Yeah, the Biden
You
administration
think
intended to open the border and intended and knew that it's foreseeable that more people would be hurt if they opened the border, and they shut down ICE knowing that they would have other harms. And so it's intent. You have, other administrations have at least tried, but the Biden administration, Mayorkas, opened the border and paid for it on purpose, and people got hurt and killed as a result. So yes, it's intent.
Why shouldn't why shouldn't families of people who were killed by illegal immigrants that entered in Trump 1 be entitled to compensation? Their member was still murdered by somebody
Uh-huh.
who shouldn't have been allowed in the country, and it happened under President Trump's watch. It's the same to them. It's the same exact situation. The intent. First off, I don't believe, as terrible as his Biden policies were, he certainly didn't intend for people to be murdered. You would acknowledge that, no?
No. I think it was a foreseeable consequence of his
You
actions.
think
I think when
Biden wanted
Oh
people
my
murdered?
God.
maybe not in the
Wait, did
particular,
Biden
but I
want the
think
two
when you're
National
looking
Guardsmen murdered in D.C. for
one
the
question
illegal
at a time,
immigrant, the guy from
guys.
Afghanistan he let in 2018?
One question at a time as I answer compound questions. This is a fun 2 versus 1. I must be doing a good job because you guys keep asking the same questions again and again. So yes, and when you're making global decisions like this and looking at the pros and cons of a decision that's consequential, it's should we open the border and shut down ICE? On the con side are the harms that illegal aliens, can commit. So did he intend it in this specific? No, probably not. Of course not. I'm not accusing him of that. But was that the logical consequence of his decision for which he chose politics over public safety? Yes. And that's the intent I'm zeroing in on. That intent is different from other administrations that have at least tried. Okay. They weren't saying like just everyone come on in and shut down ICE and, screw everyone else who's here who has to deal with it. That's the difference. And also, this is a particular fund. Do I think generally people should be able to bring those types of claims against the government? I haven't thought about it that much. But for this fund, looking at this type of weaponization, the craziness of the Biden years, that's certainly not only something I would consider, but also support.
Why did the Biden admin fight to reinstate Title 42 if they truly wanted to keep the border open and have people killed? Why did the Biden admin try to pass that bill that had been workshopped for so long by a Republican, Langford, in the Senate for so long, just for, Trump to shut it? This is like a deeply unserious argument, but I don't know how. Like the idea that that Biden intentionally wanted Americans killed by illegal immigrants, which, by the way, is probably like one of the worst things you could ever have as a president, especially when the Democrats are already seen as being softer on immigration. It doesn't even make sense.
That's their fault, though.
Biden didn't. What do you mean it's their fault?
They in 2020 they set themselves up to be perceived that way with their own statements.
Sure,
to be soft on immigration.
I don't even know how true that is. The biggest meme that was played from Kamala was her speaking at the podium. The "Do not come." Do not come.
I was referring to 2020
country.
though, when they go around all the presidential candidates and they say,
what
sure,
they might talk about being friendlier to illegal immigration or immigration or amnesty or whatever. Sure, but I'm just saying that
should we
the idea that
decriminalize border crossings? Should they all get free health care? It's their own fault they were perceived as soft on immigration, but not to derail you.
Yeah, the Republicans play a lot in maintaining the charades here, but also Biden didn't abolish ICE either. I don't even know where this comes from. Just none of these statements are even remotely true. They're all kind of goofy and unserious. I don't know I don't know how you would ever prove intent here. That did Donald Trump intend to murder Americans with his weird war in Iran, or did Donald Trump intend for people to die when he turned into a massive anti-vaxxer and however many tens of thousands of conservatives died because now they don't want to get vaccinated because they're worried about turning into magnets? That's an insanely crazy thing to say.
Okay, Mike. Well, I'll give you a final thought here. Your pitch for this fund and why you should be selected for it. Your closing word.
Yeah, I'll again end where I started. A lot of people were hurt in really bad ways. I know, people want to talk politics. They want to talk Trump or Biden or whoever else. We've done that today. But let's recenter the conversation on the real human beings that got caught up in the political maelstrom that was the Biden years. The people who lost their homes, who lost loved ones, deaths of despair, who had to pay for lawyers they never should have had to for purely harassing type political vendettas. Those are the people I want to make whole. And I think, once Americans see this fund going, and hopefully I'm a part of it, and they see people like the FACE Act victims being made whole, they see the victims of illegal alien crime, they see those that they might not be familiar with being, made whole back on their feet, we can move towards a point of truth and reconciliation and restoration. And I'm excited about it. And I thank President Trump and Attorney General Todd Blanche for getting it done so far.
Sorry, Mike. I really didn't mean to ask you, but I do have a follow-up question. Do you believe the FACE Act is unconstitutional?
Yeah, probably in the way it's been carried out. The way it certainly is implemented for sure. Yeah.
So would Don Lemon have a claim to be a victim of government weaponization, given that he was prosecuted under the FACE Act? And it's
No, he's
unconstitutional law,
outside
according to conservatives, for decades?
Well, how is it implemented? I answer your question with probably as it's been implemented. I think there's storming inside a church and with an intent for a mob versus people praying outside abortion clinics, if that's what you're asking me. But if we want to get into a common law deep dive after Steven said he doesn't want to do that if it's unserious, we're going to need a lot more than a closing comment on that.
Yeah, that's fine.
I would love to do a legal deep dive on anything. I would love nothing more. If
you guys can do that. I guess what I'll say is this, Mike. I appreciate your perspective. I agree that people who were genuinely harmed should be made whole. I'm really not sure this fund is the best way to do it, but I wish you luck in your campaign, and I appreciate your time in the spirited debate. Thanks to both of you guys for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.